Joiners were highly skilled woodworkers, and unlike carpenters, they spent most of their working hours at a bench. They commonly worked in shops where they kept large collections of woodworking tools, including planes, edge tools, saws, and measuring devices. Joiners' work consisted primarily of making parts for houses, like decorative molded trim, doors, and windows. Of all the products they made, building sash windows was perhaps the most complex and was a job usually reserved for the most skilled workmen in the shop. The sash window was introduced to the American colonies from England in the early 18th century and rapidly replaced the leaded casement window with diamond panes. To this day, the sash window continues to be the most popular form of window. Windows were one of the most costly parts of a house, both because of the glass that was set in them, but also because of the extensive amount of labor required to make the sash frames. In producing a single 6-light window sash frame, a joiner had to shape 20 lineal feet of stock and cut 14 separate, complex joints. For making sash frames, the joiner chose pine, since it was easy to work and resisted the extremes of the New England climate. The first step in making a sash frame was to plane down or dress the stock to remove the rough surface left from the sawmill. Next, the widths of the various sash members were marked with a panel marking gauge and cut out with a rip saw. Finally, the edges were straightened, or as it was commonly referred to in the trade, shot, with a long joiner. It was crucial that all the pieces of the frame were of uniform thickness. This tedious job was usually the task of an apprentice. Once all the stock was dressed, the joiner used a sash plane, which cut both the groove for the glass and the molding on the inside of the window at the same time. The narrow sash bars, called muntins, were cut in a sticking board that held the narrow bars firmly. Once the stock was molded, the joiner used a layout stick that had all the important dimensions of the window frame. He used this to transfer the location of each joint to its corresponding member. A square, a marking knife, and a tenon gauge were then used to finish the layout. To begin the actual joined construction of the frame, the shoulders of the tenons were carefully cut to the scribed line with a small back saw. The waste material was first split off using a chisel and mallet, and finally pared smooth with a broad chisel. Next, another special plane was used to cope the shoulder of the tenon so it would fit snugly in the molded surface of the frame, or stiles. Finally, the tenon was reduced in width to fit into the stile mortise. The narrow muntin bars were cut in the same manner, but the coped ends were cut using a saddle gauge and a sharp gouge. All the frame's tenons would be cut before proceeding to the next step. Chopping or cutting the mortises for the frame was done with the stock clamped securely in a vise, and using a sharp mortise chisel that was the same thickness as the tenon and a wooden mallet, the joiner made a series of V-cuts to remove the wood from the mortise. Each side was cut only halfway through, to prevent the opposite edge from tearing out. When the two sides were connected, the joint was cleaned out with a few paring cuts. The smaller mortises for the muntins were pre-drilled first to remove some waste, and then chopped. Once all the members had been cut, the frame was assembled, first by inserting the upright muntins in their mortises and driving them home firmly with a mallet. Next, the rail tenons were slid into the stile mortises and set with a mallet. The length of each short horizontal muntin was then measured directly from the assembled frame. It was cut to size, coped, and finally inserted in its mortise. Glue was never used in window construction since it would eventually fail with the temperature and moisture extremes that a window was exposed to. Once all of the joints had been checked to make sure they fit snugly, the frame was fit with small wedges driven into the tenons that helped tighten the joints and square the frame. Finally, using a dowel bit, the joiner bored a hole through each mortise and tenon and drove a wood pin, usually made from scrap pine.